Okay, today's video we're going to talk about Google Display Network campaigns. Display advertising, basically running through Google Ads and specifically called Google Display Network. If you're going to do this, I'm going to give you a few tips starting out so you basically end off on the wrong track to get you totally discouraged about Google Display Network before it works. Because it certainly absolutely does work, but there's a few key things that you should know, particularly how to set up the targeting of those campaigns. And as you will see if you go in there for the first time, there's several targeting options. The main ones being what they call these in-market and affinity audience or audience segments that you could target. And I'm going to tell you about what those are specifically, why you don't necessarily want them, as the title here implies, and what are your alternatives which are much, much better and should probably make you money right away, of which I do personally on my campaigns, and I've set up hundreds of display campaigns. So if you're going to start out somewhere, you might as well just start out where I am today and have learned what kind of doesn't work and does work over the last 10 years. Google Display Network has not changed that much over time. They've added a few other options, which I've tested, the different available options there as they come out. Some work, some don't. I'm going to give you all those on today's video. So anyway, let's go ahead and get started. Where most people start out in doing Google Display Network when they're going to go ahead and try it for the first time are these easy to set up / choose affinity and in-market audience segments. So basically, and this is not a thing just specifically for display advertising, somebody's going to start advertising on Google. First of all, they're probably going to advertise on Google search, not on other websites through the Google Display Network. But people want it to be easy, and I don't blame anybody. The first instinct people have is, okay, the Google setup wizard to set up an account through Google Ads took me 5 minutes. Okay, well, I'm going to wait to get rich now. If it was that easy, your competitors would have been doing it, as I say many times on these videos. You got to be able to, if you're going to make Google Ads work or any PPC work, you've got to be able to do it better than your competition. And your competition potentially has years of experience, and not only that, but money behind their campaigns to find out what works already. So you're coming in all motivated, thinking that you found something that's going to work, and your competitors are way ahead of you. And a lot of times those people will get discouraged and quit. That doesn't have to be you. Even if you do have something that doesn't work, just think about it as a learning process, learning experience. But they'll try these Google Display Network ads, maybe if they got their Google search campaigns to work, and then they have these nice, easy to click on defined audiences that are like home, goods buyers, and you sell custom blinds or something like that. And you think, oh, that's pretty close. Why don't I try that? That's not going to probably work for you. You need much more refined targeting if your display advertising is going to work. And a lot of times you can't get it right away. You have to run your ads and do some refinement and teach the algorithm how to run. And I'm going to talk about that in a minute. Similar to how Facebook works. If you're going to also get Facebook to work, it's not as simply as just a light switch. Oh, I turned my ads on. I'm getting rich right now. Oh, I'm not rich yet. Oh, it doesn't work. That's what most people want ads to be, and that's not how it works 99% of the time, no matter where you're doing PPC online or online advertising. Particularly on Facebook, you do have to have like a several month runway to usually get the ad algorithm to figure out what worked and then build upon that using a positive feedback loop. And these Google Display Network ads are similar. However, I can get Google Display Network to work better and faster than Facebook, at least initially, because your targeting options are much more refined if you just get in there a little bit further than what you are going to notice right away. These in-market and affinity audience targeting segments. So unless you have an exact dead-on match, is what I'll call it, for the audience description that you're trying to target there in your Google Display Network targeting settings, and when you set up the campaign for yourself for the first time, if the in-market or affinity segment is not like exact dead-on match what you do, or who you're trying to target, then basically stay away from it, because that's the only time I get those predefined audiences to work that I don't have to set up through what they call custom audience setup itself. An example of that would be where I've had it work before. It was like a wedding planner. If you are a wedding planner, there is an audience wedding planner or planning. Okay, that's like exact match enough to where I'll just select that. I don't need to go ahead and do all these other audiences I'm going to tell you about here in a second that are going to basically just narrow down the targeting to. The goal always with the display network advertising is, okay, we could target, 50 million people here, 100 million people here. Of the 100 million, there's about 5,000 that have the propensity to buy. How do I narrow down to just that 5,000? If I do, I'll make money. If I don't, I'll have so much waste it won't make money. And so if you have an exact match, you're basically already there. That's so what you have to do to make the campaigns pay for themselves after all their expenses and so forth. But if you had that situation like wedding planner, and even that, by the way, if you just targeted that, and that's all you did, and your competition does that, where's your edge? Like I said at the start of the video, you can't just do what everybody else is doing and expect to make money unless there's like very little competition, and you're like the only one that can figure out what you do. If you're in a hyper-competitive niche, which 90% of the markets, you could call it that, you're not doing anything special, then you need to go beyond. What's your edge going to be that's going to get you a little bit higher targeting, make your ad a little bit more enticing, so that you can take the ad space and the opportunity and monetize it at a greater level than your competition. In the wedding planning space, though, if I had an app that seeks to make the process easier of planning a wedding versus going to a traditional wedding planner, like a physical planner, like a consultant, then that would be a great situation where I would pick that predefined default setting, targeting option, the in-market display network option that's naturally there in the targeting settings, because I know basically nobody's doing that, and the people that are going to use an app has a longer lifetime value or larger lifetime value than a consultant, what I can get out of somebody one time, because somebody who can use the app refer to somebody else, and so therefore my edge already is just the business model itself. Therefore targeting what everybody else targets there is good. I got my edge. You got my drift on this whole thing. So anyway, you get the picture here. Almost always will you be a bit better, do a bit better of a job targeting your ads and making money than when you have these custom intent audience segments that you're going to craft for yourself to target these ads instead of these pre-populated normal in-market or affinity audience segments. And before you try any of these affinity or in-market segments at all, respectively, you should probably just go for these custom intent audience segments. It's less than 5% of the time where I'm going to have an exact match enough to where on these affinity and in-market segments that I can use that and make it work. So respectively, for all you guys watching the video, just go after these custom audience segments. You're going to have to set up manually your audience so that you can define to Google exactly what your customers are like, so you don't have all this waste targeting people that aren't to be targeted, in which your budget goes, and you get over the threshold of it being so untargeted to the point where it just doesn't make any money. Now, how do you set up these custom intent audience segments? I've got a list here of the ones that I go to 80+% of the time, in which you can start right away, and which you kind of the order and priority of what you should roll these out for yourself. That work most of the time. So basically, if you try this, you can try this and then tweak what you have to improve it, but pretty much this should get you going right away, as it does for me when I usually get to the point of running display advertising. I've gotten search engine advertising to work. I'm ready to go into display, and I'll go ahead and use these targeting options right away with what we're doing. So custom audiences to try out first instead of the pre-populated affinity and in-market Google Display Network targeting settings would be number one, have as letter A here, buying keywords down to by product or service category. So if you sell a bunch of different distinct products or services, I'm going to create a list. So basically, I usually at this point, I'm going to run Google Display Network campaigns. As I mentioned, I'll have Google search ads already working for me. And so I'll usually at the very start of setting up the search engine campaigns, I'll be targeting what I call buying terms. If I sell red shoes, it'll be red shoes for sale, best red shoes for sale. Those are what I call buying keywords, whereas red shoes is not indicative that that person's looking to buy, even though that could be profitable, could be worth it at some lower bid or price, for that traffic that I'm willing to pay to get that traffic. But there's these cream of the crop keywords where they indicate in their search that they're ready to buy and buy now. Those generally always work in search campaigns, but with those specifically, I'll create a custom audience, and then when it asks me what I want for the custom audience, I'll dump those buying keywords in there and then save it, and there's my custom audience. But I do it for each category of product or service I sell. So if I sell, if I sell household goods and I sell, let's say furniture, and I sell couches and I sell recliners, I'm going to have all my recliner keywords in a group and a couch keywords in a group, respectively, so that I can create two distinct audiences there. So why? Because ultimately my ad that could be customized to approaching and attracting somebody who's getting a couch, use language about a couch for people that are looking for a couch at that point. Otherwise, you're trying to speak to everybody and you sell a lot of different items, it's usually not going to work. So if you have a lot of distinct different types of items, then you definitely should sub-segment your custom audiences by category. But that would be usually my first go-to. My other second go-to is the competitor terms, which I would use to define a custom intent audience. So what I mean by that is, and this is the one that has the bigger return, but usually the smaller volume available, let's say. So with that, I'll go and make a list of all my direct competitors. I'll write down all their business names, their trade names, their legal names into a file, and I'll use that to create a custom audience the way that I did it and explain you do it for, like with the buying keywords here, so that, and I'll actually with that list save the domain name www.theirsite.com, so that if somebody types that into Google or any of my competitors' names in there in Google, that goes into a database which Google saves it, and then so like up to 30 days after, I can have my display ads show up for somebody who'd been to their site or were interested in going to their site. Because obviously if they're interested in my competitor's product, they'll be interested in ours a high percentage of the time, which goes to narrowing down who we're targeting enough to where the paying the 50 cents a click probably will be worth it. Like I said, this whole thing revolves around. So I'll do that. I'll do generally one audience for every competitor so that I can have an ad that speaks to why I'm better than that competitor in the ad, and that I can take them to a specific part of my site in which the competitor has product that's a higher end product. So I want to be able to define where we send them on our site, which is the part of our site that has the higher end products. That level of extra control is tedious, but that's where all your results come from. And if you don't have the results you want and you haven't done this yet, that's your key usually to get it to work. Respectively, to go one step further, if you want even better results or you don't have the ROI that you want yet, I'm going to not just write down, so I'm going to have an audience for all the people that search for a competitor, my competitor by competitor, using their overall, overarching company name and so forth. I'm also going to look at all the ways that people find their items or their products or services themselves. If they sell like a house branded item, if it's, Johnny's beer mugs, here's a better example. So I sell bar supplies. So if I sell beer mugs and I have my house brand as Johnny's beer mugs, I'm going to create an audience around Johnny's beer mugs. Assuming we're talking about the competitor here still. I sell beer mugs, so does the competitor. I have 5 different competitors. Of this one competitor here, I'm going to create a custom audience targeting all the ways that people look for that company specifically by name. And then I'm going to create a custom audience for each of the individual products they sell by name, so that I could create an ad for people that are looking for Johnny's beer mugs for that specific item, so I could refer them to why I have a beer mug that's also in our store that's better than that beer mug, why it's better, put that ad copy in the ad and send them directly to the beer mug that's the closest match, and should be, if I were to refer them directly personally in a conversation, where I would direct them to in the conversation in which I direct them to on my site. So you'll have a bunch of these audiences for each product or service that your competitors sell, and then you have to have an ad that's relevant to them and take them to a relevant part on your site. But that works very, very, very well. Yes, it's very, very time consuming and tedious, again, to set all this up, but you got to think about it from the consumer's perspective. You're going to like it if somebody goes through the time, and I'm looking for a industrial painting machine, and I don't know what to buy, and I looked at a few, and there was a machine, XT1280 that I'm interested in. And if I'm going to buy one, I'm leaning towards that one. And I see an ad all of a sudden saying the XT2080 is a good machine, but this is a better machine. It's more powerful. It's a little bit cheaper. That's helping me. People will get pissed off about advertisers when you use ad blockers because they try to take the easy approach. And this is mostly the fault. They'll say people don't want to do the work, so they'll hire a high-end ad agency that has a big name, which they think if they do that, all the problems are done and all their work is that they need to do is done. And then they don't do any of this stuff. And then they just pound people with the ads, and they don't care if it works. It's not their money. And then nobody wins. The user's pissed off. There's no money being made. The in-person paying for all this in terms of the ads don't know that what they're getting because the agency did not tell them how to set up the tracking effectively enough to actually tell if it wasn't working. And then it just makes for a whole crappier world. Whereas you're going to go through the actual little bit of pain to tell people why they should buy your item. You could think about it like this. If somebody's going to call and they wanted to buy, and you would take the time to refer them to the item to make a sale. Once you actually create in a spreadsheet a reason why people looking at product XYZ for competitors should buy your product and which one they should buy, you don't have to do anything after it's set up. It will work for literally years after that. Nobody's going to see your ad and copy it because everybody's inherently lazy. And it just works and works and works. It's like your automated salesperson. Part of the reason why people do online marketing is because they don't have to, it's all automated. Assuming you set up your sales funnels right, they just work without you having to work. So, but to do that, you actually got to put in the time and pay your dues to help the user and doing a little bit of research for them, and that you can package up because that's what you're doing here. If you do, you make the money. If not, well, you make what 80% of most people make that do PPC, which is little to nothing. And that is accurate. And then you see all these people advertising. They're probably not making money or very little. Just because you see they're spending a lot doesn't mean they're making money. Very few actually make a lot, and there's just the 20% cream of the crop that make most of it. And those people they understand what they're doing to some degree. So anyway, you got that one. That's the big one. So A/B is what you start out with. Eventually, after you've gotten, so you'll set up your tracking so that you'll know when you got a lead or a sale, depending on what you're doing there. And you'll get some sales, and eventually, or just you're paying for a decent amount of traffic. Google, through the Google display campaign targeting settings, they'll auto-populate what they call auto-created custom audience segments that say, we looked at your traffic, we saw that out of our millions of data points that we have on all our Google users, that the people who like and are most interested in your products and will stay around on your site the longest and inherently, contact you or whatever, have these 45 traits in common, let's say 70% of the time. So we profile them and we've called them this. And then so it'll pop up there, and it wasn't there before, but it's there now. Anytime you see those, you go ahead and select them because the algorithm's done an analysis basically at a level which you could never do it. And you choose those, and what happens over time is if you have your tracking set up like you're supposed to, which it's another one of those things, it's tempting to just set up the ads and say, oh, screw the tracking, I don't have time for that. You spend all this money, if it's not working, now you can know what your ads are worth that you've spent and you have set up so that you can start getting the return you want. Assuming your tracking set up right and you know what you need to pay for a conversion, because if you looked at your margins and all that, which you should all do ahead of time, if you want to be in the top 20% that make money, you got to do some kind of thinking here. You create your ad that targets that segment, and then it'll tell you what it converts at, and it'll convert at a little bit worse than what it eventually converts at because the audience is self-correcting as you go. But it allows you to set, if you have the manual bidding set up, which I always recommend you do, don't let the algorithm go nuts, especially if you're doing lead generation, because unless you have the revenue data feeding back in from offline conversion tracking, because you'll get a false feedback loop from leads that are crappy, that are easier to get coming in. Talked about that in other videos, but you can assign a unique bid to that audience, and all the other auto-created custom audience segments based upon their proportion and capability to deliver a conversion at the cost you need. You can adjust your bid up or down mathematically using what they call bid adjustment formula. You can Google that, so that you get the most conversions at the cost per conversion you need. And now once it's dialed in that degree or in that way, it works without you having to do anything. It's very predictable, brings in a certain amount of sales, as does all the rest of your audio segments, as does all the other custom audio segments you created up here in A and B. So that'll kind of be like the third thing, if you will, that I'll do after the first two are done. Now there's these last two that'll come in, assuming you have your tracking set up right here again. When you get started, so you get out ahead of the game here, this is like, Sun Tzu Art of War. The more prepared you are with your BBZ here and your Google Display Network strategy, the more likely you're going to win. So before you start, you set up your analysis to see what your cost per conversion should be to reach your margins that you want. And you set up your tracking. And you're going to set up a separate audience for people who purchase or become a lead, so that eventually later on, when you go into your Google Display targeting settings, there will be a audience that springs up there that says similar to purchasers. So basically, because it's going to look at all the purchasers you have that are coming through, you'll need about 1,000 to for sure have it pop up and have that audience be reliable. But again, similar to how I described this before, it's going to look at all the of the million possible data points that they have on all their users coming from Google. Because they look at everything that people do on Google, where you click, what you do, who you are, data that they buy from third-party companies to analyze who you are at a deeper level. And they match up all these data points that are similar between all the people who did buy. And then it's going to come up and say similar to the people who buy, and then you will be able to target that specifically. And then again, sign a unique bid there. Respectively, that will get more and more productive the more and more sales you get. So the idea is you'll start out, first few months it's probably not going to be profitable to run your ads. You're going to expect that going in. You're going to invest a budget you can afford to lose starting out to find out what each one of these categories are worth in terms of what you're paying per click. You dial that in. Eventually you get enough purchasers to be able to have Google figure out what are the unique traits of your purchasers, and just have your ads show up for those people that have those traits exclusively. And then the more customers you get, the better that gets, and it'll eventually just take on a life of its own. Respectively, though, you want to set up in advance, or at least once you start doing this, similar to purchasers or people that are a converter / lead, if you want a person that you can't track the sales, but you can track the leads of. If you have, going back to the furniture or the home furniture example, sell couches, you sell chairs, I'm going to set up an audience before I get started just to get out ahead of it, because I know what my normal process I'm going through here to be successful with Google Display. It's a process that I'm going to want, again, a special ad to target people who are interested in a couch, with an ad that mentions something about a couch and sends people to our couch section of our website instead of just a homepage. And so if you set a audience up for purchasers' couches, so basically, did they buy a couch? They make this audience. If they bought a recliner, they're going to make this audience. So I can segment out the ads and the destination of where they're taking people to, and also so that because the traits of a person who buys a couch is different than a person who buys a recliner. They're just going to be different. They may not seem that different to you, because they're usually the people who buy a couch buy a chair at the same time, or they're refurnishing the room. But I can tell you, Google's got literally minimum millions of data points on all their users. And through machine learning, they can figure out very specifically what makes one type of user different than another. And you will have some differentiation between a person who buys item A from item B, and you'll get better results targeting people who buy that were like people who bought item B versus item A and B, if you get my drift here. So once you get to 10,000 purchases, you usually can segment out your campaign to people who bought that are similar to something that somebody who bought a specific item versus just somebody who bought in general. So I would add that layer of sophistication to my campaign through which will show up there in your targeting settings automatically once you have enough conversions, and which if you set up an audience just for purchasers ahead of time so that Google can use the purchasers audience you set up to actually propagate the similar to purchasers. Because any audience you create, they'll actually say similar to and then that audience. What I'm telling you is out of the similar to audiences here, the main ones you want to worry about the ones are the similar to the ones that converted into a sale or a lead as far as you can track it basically. And if you are tracking leads, try to get it into tracking people who converted it into a sale using what is called offline conversion tracking so that you can actually have the data analysis of the people who bought, not just the people who turned into a lead, because like I said, that can be problematic sometimes, based upon them delivering more and more leads of people that are give you a cheap lead but not an effective or highly converting lead. And you won't know it until you've paid for hundreds of leads. The algorithm's just trying to do what it's supposed to do, and it just goes nuts, finds a pocket of people who are not qualified but like will waste your time essentially. So you're wasting money on ads and you're wasting time on the phone or what have you with people that'll never buy it, and it just goes nuts in that regard. So anyway, I think it's enough information. This is where I'm going to go with my Google Display Network campaigns, and not going to absolutely generally go for, because I'm lazy, Affinity and In-market segments by themselves. If you enjoyed this video, I have a ton of other videos on this channel about other PPC money-making strategies. Excuse me. You should check those out, certainly, if you have not seen any of my other videos, if you want to make money with PPC. I have a blog at guaranteeppc.com/blog with step-by-step instructions on how to build campaigns that are guaranteed to work for our clients, and which I have created myself. If you want to see some information along those lines, you can find it there. If you have any questions or comments, or think I should have covered something about this that I didn't, leave me a comment below. I get back to every single person who leaves me a comment on this channel within a day or two. Apart from that, I hope you enjoy it, and I'll see you on the next one.